So my name is Adam Berns. I am a Senior Technical Alliances Specialist at Logitech. It really means I deal with a bunch of stuff that nobody knows what to do with. So if you have the Logitech Nook in your bundle, or you have the Lenovo Core or the Dell, I am responsible for that image. I am also the escalation points when you call support and they're like, they have no idea, they call me on that. I deal with all of our sync partners. I do anything that doesn't fall into typical AV alliances, right? So anything bizarre, that's sync, compute, list goes on and on. So first, I truly want to thank all of our sponsors, us, LG, Landis, all of our platinum, gold, and silver. Everybody has just been great. This is the one event that I go to my boss and I say, I have to come to this one event. I don't care about anything else but this one, because this is where like the fun is. This is where the actual true IT decision makers are, the people who are doing the work, who are telling people what they need to do. So an agenda, very basic, nothing super exciting in there. But I really want to thank LG for one, being a partner of ours at this, for helping me with this deck. I want to thank Brightline, who also helped us with this deck. They are a great partner. And then Braun Consulting, they are AV specialist as well. So a little bit about me. Last time I presented in front of most of you was at LinkConf in 2014, which unfortunately I had the first slot of the second day, and that was after going out with Alex Lewis and Ken Lasko and just having a little too much fun. It was a brutal morning, that next one. So I've been in IT, or was in IT, for about 30 years. I did my first Exchange migration from Exchange 4 to 5.0, where you actually had to buy that SMTP email license, right? I wrote a couple chapters in Skype for Business Unleashed, specifically the networking and virtualization chapters. That's because I was a drinking buddy of Alex Lewis's back in the day. My background actually is in performing arts, design, technology, and management, so technical theater, so lighting design, scene design, construction. I worked for Imagineering for a while. I did a couple stage shows. I was one of the technical directors for the Pocahontas stage show at Disney, did a couple ride work. You never want to see a ride at Disneyland with all the lights on. It is really depressing. I promise you don't want to see that. I have twin teenage kids who are learning how to drive, so it's a little bit stressful. I don't care what state you're in, I would highly recommend staying off sidewalks. They will figure out how to get there. I don't know that. My hobby, I have a really stupid hobby. I do competition barbecue as a hobby. I have been to the American Royal, the Jack Daniels. I have a few first place in my closet. But really, I'm known for just making stuff on barbecues. This is a barbecue fatty. If anyone wants to know more about this, come see me. I can talk for days on this one. But really, mostly what I do now is I teach classes for charities. So they'll book an event, I'll do a class with 10 to 12 people, and we will cook maybe 20 different things in about 6 hours and eat them all. It is a long day of eating a lot of food and drinking a lot of beer. But it is probably one of my most favorite things to do. Those are my kids long ago, and this may be why my daughter doesn't like mustard. And whether or not you put mustard on your ribs, that's your own thing. We can debate that forever. That's up to you. So let's boldly go forward. Who can tell me what this is? That looks like the Starship Enterprise, right? Right? You would kind of agree. Now, but it's actually not that. This is actually the first video conference room ever, and it's one of the best examples of video conferencing out there. Now, in that space, two things always happened. They were either dealing with a crisis or a plan. And every meeting they walked out of, they had action items and they knew what was going to happen, right? Most of us come out of a meeting of what was that all about? Why were we there, right? Never happened on the Enterprise. Now, why was it successful, right? It could be good story, good plot. Personally, tribbles, right? The tribbles were like the ultimate thing on Star Trek, right? Everybody always wanted one. Now, but why was this a really good conference room? Well, first of all, everybody could see the screen, right? And everyone could be seen from the screen. Everybody was perfectly lit, right? You never saw somebody in poor lighting. And the background that behind them all wasn't just this boring, flat, white wall, right? There was something there to keep an eye on, right? To deal with lighting, to look at it. Now, which led to an equitable meeting for everybody. Unless, of course, you're the bad guy, you're going to die in the end anyway, so really who mattered? But on screen, they always looked good. So whatever everybody had on their spaceships, they had really good lighting, and they all agreed on how lighting should work. So let's talk about that. And have you ever noticed in the transporter, they would transport somewhere, and no matter where they were, their face was well lit. It could be a cave, it could be anywhere, but you can always see them. And that's really due to good lighting. So let's talk about that. Take a look at these three rooms. Now, image quality really affects the success of a meeting, right? Lights, camera, compression, software, network bandwidth, all have an impact on how good that meeting really is, right? That's all basic stuff we all talk about. Now, standard drop ceiling lighting really isn't that great for a meeting, right? It's just flat, overhead, you don't have any contour to it. So collaboration really needs vibrant lighting and well lighting so the content is projected clearly, right? You're in a dark room, it's a little bit hard to see, too bright, too hard to see, lights in your eyes, too hard to see, right? You need that good lighting. So really, it comes down to improve this, have good lighting, right? Make sure the lighting is there. Now, no matter how good your camera really is, if you don't have good lighting, you're not going to see anybody, right? It doesn't matter how good your auto white balance is, brightness, saturation, none of that. You got to have good lighting. So I'm going to talk about a few things about lighting, and we're going to come back to these three rooms, and we'll see why these are poor examples of lighting a room. Now, normally, I would talk about this perfectly balanced white box, or white balance. We'll come to back in a few minutes on that one. If anybody comes from a theater background, you've heard the name McCandless. And he really studied lighting in theater and how that affects what people look like. And he came up with this theory that perfect lighting is a light that's 45 degrees up and 45 degrees over. And you have two of them. One is a key, one is a fill, which basically means one is slightly brighter than the other. That will give you good contoured lighting on your face. Now, in practicality, what this really looks like. Somebody sitting in a chair, right? Up 5, over 5, that gives you perfect 45 degree. And you have two of them on 45 degrees over, right? We know that's not always perfect, right? The idea is to get something that's not flat on, right, and not straight overhead, right? That's the key part to this. So let's look at this in practicality. Two images, same person, right? In a room. On the right-hand side, there's a window to her left, all right? That's it, the only light. And there's a light kind of behind her and up a little bit. The other one, same lighting is still in play, but now she has added a light to one side to help fill out her face and added a light above her a little bit as well. So she has a light up and over to help give her more contour on her face. By having that extra contour on your face, you're going to feel more confident about how you look. If you look at these two images, right, one, she's going on the left-hand side, she's going to feel a lot more confident about her ability to present and talk to somebody versus on her right. So having that visual feeling that I know I am well lit will boost their confidence. So let's look at this one. This is another way. This is a smaller huddle space, right? And we have a display, we have a Rally Bar Mini, and then we have a See Me 3 light. That light is exactly 45 degrees up and 45 degrees up from where the person is sitting. It's not flat on them, so it gives them that contour. Just one light, but it helps, right? You can't see the other person on their side, but believe me, it is actually 45 degrees. And you can kind of see on the left-hand side some different ways of doing this, right, for a huddle space. Very easy to do, right? You have a light either on either side of a credenza, right, straight up and down. You have one mounted to either side of the display, mounted to a wall. Or you have just one above at a 45 degree, right? All of those options are going to help make you look a lot better, right? And again, this comes back to self-confidence of lighting. Let's look at this room. This is actually a government room, right? Now, on the right-hand side, it's just drop ceiling light, all right? The light is directly overhead. I'm pretty sure lighting the wall either doesn't do much good. So if you look on the left-hand side, now when you go to Vegas, do you look at the ceiling? No, right? When you're in a video conference, do you see the ceiling? No. So why do people care about what a ceiling looks like in a conference room? You shouldn't. You should care about what the people look like, how they are lit, right? That is the most important thing in that room. The ceiling, the art on the wall, make the people look good. Take the time to light them, all right? So you can see in this room, this was a retrofit. All of those extra lightings are all low voltage, right? That is easily doable on your own. You can make that kind of lighting on your own, all right? You may want to get facilities to help you, but you know, it's none of that lighting is high voltage. It's all low voltage lighting, LED based. Why LED? So LED gives you some nice options. Color temperature, right? We'll get into that a little bit later, how color temperature plays into all of this. So let's go back to those three rooms here. On this first room, why are they lighting the top of the ceiling? Maybe they're trying to get some reflection off of there. Why are they spending all this money on this fancy lighting that really, look at the people. They're not lit. They're going to be sitting there and they're going to be dark. This room, again, they're lighting the ceiling. You know, maybe the people opposite of the lighting, if they're not sitting in the shadow of the person on the other side, you're going to see their face, right? The backs of the heads of the people against the window are going to have great lighting. And maybe if they're like really bald, they'll reflect a little bit and you'll be able to see a little bit more. And this one, I just don't get. Why are you lighting a wall? Like, why waste that time? And again, you think you can see anybody sitting in a chair in that room? Probably not, right? So again, the rooms look nice. They have very nice chairs, nice tables, right? Basic standard drop ceiling, but you can't see a single person in that room. So why waste the time, the money, the energy to put a nice chandelier in there, right? And every slide you see from everybody, they have a great, nice chandelier in the room, right? Why? I don't understand why people think chandeliers in a conference room are a good idea, right? Light the people, make them the center of it. So one of my favorite terms in Star Trek, on screen, right? Everything on screen. Show me what's on the screen. Pilots, everything was on the screen. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on talking about displays. Just because there's a lot of confusion about them, and I'll apologize, we will have a couple slides with text on them, and we will have some math involved here, all right? So I am sorry for the math. We've all seen this chart, right? Or something similar, like you're this far back, right? You need to have a screen this size, or this size, or this size. But it's missing a lot, right? It doesn't tell you how you're using the room. It doesn't tell you how far and how close. There's a lot of things missing to that chart. So before we can really talk about light screens, we've got to talk a little bit about your vision. Now, there's a term called visual acuity. When you go to when you go get your eye test, they're looking for visual acuity. That is how crisp an image is at 20 feet. 20 feet, maybe you heard the term 20/20 vision. It's actually, there's some good documentation that makes why 20/20 vision, visual acuity, and all of this placed together like, holy cow, this is why this all makes sense. That's a whole presentation on its own, just that. So for some of this, you're gonna have to take my word for it, all right? Whoops. Sorry, I wanna go back one. So really, things to remember is humans, we don't use pixels, right? We have cones, right? Just like cameras use RGB, we have cones RGB, and in low light, right, we have different cones we use. Now, what this comes out to be is that our vision, the way they measure it, is called arc minutes, right? So you take 360 degrees, you divide it into 1/60th. Each one of those degrees is an arc minute, right? That arc minute is how much two lines together become one. Does that kind of make sense a little bit? For now, you just have to trust me on that statement. And so the further you are, the bigger that arc minute gets at the end, the more things blur together, all right? And so really, this is the basics of figuring out the right display size, right? That is what leads into display sizing, is how much can your eye see of individual things at a certain distance, at a certain angle. So there's this group that you've probably all heard of, right? Avixa, and they came up with display image size for 2D content in audio-visual system, or DISCUS. Just try to say that one time slow. Like, I can barely get this. So this is really a standard of measurement of display sizes. So the standard really comes down to a few key things. Appropriate display image sizes. It provides a way to calculate those image sizes, to look at how clear the image, but it also talks about how a room is used, the types of rooms, and we'll get that into the next slide. But really, the key to all of this, furthest person, closest person to the display. That is what drives the display size, right? Along with how it's being used. So, math. It's actually not as ugly as it is. But so, really, there's two terms, and I love these terms because it really summarizes a space really well. And in a meeting space, you're either looking at analytical data, right? Like you're looking at a spreadsheet and you're trying to really understand that. Maybe it's a CAD drawing, right? Something that you're truly trying to ponder that is highly detailed. And then there's a basic room, which is webinars, PowerPoint slides, things like that, where really it's more about the discussion, right? And more about talking to people, right? So those are the two kinds of rooms they summarize to. And if you think about it, what else do you do in a room? You look at data, you try to figure it out, or you're talking to somebody, right? And it really makes, I think, if you focus on understanding those two terms, It's going to simplify your room thought process greatly. But let's look at these two formulas here, and they're actually not that complex. So both sides, you have IH, which is your image height, right? Your screen height, not screen size, diagonal screen height, right? You have your IR, which is your vertical image resolution, so 1080p versus 4K, right? And then you have these two numbers, 3438 and 200. These are actually a standard number based off of visual acuity. Trust me on those numbers, it's just what they are. If you want to know how those numbers, you can read the whole document on Discus on that, all right? But they're based off of 2020 vision quality, all right? So now EH, that's a tricky one. That is actually the percentage of the font it is to the size of the display, all right? So let's go through one of these really quickly. So we're going to look at a basic decision making. Now the reality is, the reason we compare these two is there is a size ratio, which also comes into play with cost. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So we're going to look at a basic decision room. So we have our formula, right? And we're going to say the person is 7 feet from the display, right? That's a pretty typical distance now. So we have our 7 feet on the top. We have our 24-inch PowerPoint slide font we're using, right? We have our ratio, right? So what we end up with is this formula, right? So now we end up with a screen height of 3.15 feet, which ends up being about 72-inch display size for somebody sitting 7 feet away for a basic kind of, maybe you're for a webinar room or whatever, right? We'll get into more analytical one in a minute. Kind of makes sense. Not super complex math. You can do that in about 2 seconds in Excel, right? So let's look at some examples of different rooms, right, and how this actually plays into effect. So this is a large room, right? That chair is probably maybe like 8 or 9 feet back from the wall, right? 10, somewhere around in there. So we actually end up with about a 98-inch display, single display, and I'll talk more about single double in a minute, right? At some point too, 2 98 displays may be cost prohibitive, right? That we all know cost plays the biggest part in all of these decisions, right? No matter what you want to do, they're going to say, can't afford it, right? So you have your camera, your speakers. This is a great room for conversation. It's also a good layout for online meetings for about half the table, right? The back wall here, it's not white, so not reflective, right? Has texture to it. Let's look at this room. So this room, right? Again, good lighting. You have windows on either side, right? The display fits the size of that one. The reason I like this one is, could you go with a bigger display? Probably. You go much bigger though, you're going to lose aesthetics in the room, right? And aesthetics are really important to a room, right? That if you don't have the furniture that people like, you don't have the display size that fits, people aren't going to walk in there. So if they put a display that goes from wall to wall, it's going to look a little bit out of size, right? Things aren't going to quite seem right. Having that border around that image, around that TV, kind of gives some context of distance, right? So dual displays. Here we have a dual display. So when you go into a meeting, right, one of two things are happening. You're talking to somebody or you're looking at an image, right? When somebody starts presenting, are you looking at them or are you looking at the image? You're looking at the image, right? The reason we talk about dual displays in a medium-sized room is usually those are used for more analytical decision making, right? Where you're looking at something and you're trying to figure out what it all means and you're talking to somebody at the same time. Compared to a larger room where you are just usually either being presented something or you're talking to people, right? You're usually not trying to do both at one time. If you look at a boardroom, right? End of the quarter, they bring up their slide deck, they talk about how great their company did, right? And they go on, right? You're not necessarily looking at the person. Now, of course, together mode 21:9 changes all of that, because now you actually can see everything at once on one screen. I do want to I'll talk about something I saw on large screen displays in a minute here. So in a medium-sized room where you're doing both of these things, it really makes sense because you have a small group of people working together on one thing, right? So you're having those conversations and the analytical side of it at the same time. So now we go into a huddle room. Again, we're back to a single display, because if you think about this, right, a huddle room is usually a lot smaller. You can have two really small displays or one really big one to help see everything clearly. So again, understanding what's going to happen in that room is an important part to picking the right size display that you're going to put in there, right? And one of the things I like about this room is the background of that wall, right? It's not white, it's got some texture to it, right? It's got a nice frame around it. So let's talk about CE what? Like every meeting they talk about CEC. So I'm going to try to help clarify this a little bit more, right? And I'm sorry, I'm going to put up 2 slides here with a lot of words. You're going to read them as I talk about them, all right? So the very most important thing to understand is consumer versus commercial displays, all right? It is a consumer TV, a commercial display, not a commercial TV. If you come from theater, it's the difference between a lamp and a light bulb. Very similar, but not anywhere near like each other, all right? So what does this really come down to? A consumer display is not designed for the usage in a meeting room. They're not designed for the always on, right? They are not designed for the lifetime expectancy, and they have a bunch of other crap on there you really don't need or want, right? And one of the most key parts of this is they only support CEC. And CEC is a standard, and as you know, everybody has their own standard of a standard, right? So CEC works one way on one display, it may work slightly different on another, right? So let's talk about what a commercial display is, not a TV, all right? Not a TV. Commercial displays are designed for being always on, right? They're just designed to always work. They are designed for manageability, right? So you can manage them. But let's talk about how on a commercial display this works, all right? So you walk into a conference room, right? The PIR sensor on your front of room display picks up somebody on there. It sends a hot plug event, technical term, a hot plug event to the Windows sends that event to the display to turn on. It's not a CEC command. It's a hot plug event, all right? So what that really means is if you're running a commercial display, you could turn off CEC in your BIOS and everything's going to work just fine, right? The reason that bars, Rally Bar, for example, has CEC in it by default is because people still want to go to Costco, go to wherever, and put up a consumer display. So we have to have that in there. It's also per Microsoft that we have to have that in there for that reason. If we can just get everybody to go, I'm going to spend the 20% more on a commercial display and have that manageability, that stability, the configuration, all those parts to it, you will always walk into a room that's going to work because it is designed to work that way, right? You're not fighting weird, sub-sleep menus or weird brightness settings, right? A lot of TVs have brightness sensors. You walk in there, the brightness changes, like, what's going on? So commercial displays are not just about the CEC part of it. It's about the whole experience of how that display works. So there's also more to it though, right? And please, please, I'm begging you, get rid of the remote, right? We all know what this remote is, sadly no longer made, but get rid of the remote. There is no need to have a remote in a room, ever. If you think you need one, take a look at how you're using that room, right? Maybe you need to put an HDMI ingest on the table, right? If you do need that, put a wall control in there so that they cannot do anything, right? The second part is configure your rooms, right? Don't just slap the display up there and go, plug your stuff in, okay, we're done. No. For example, Logitech, LG, we work together to make a enterprise code. You type in that code, it locks out the display, locks out the controls, locks out the remote. So you cannot do anything on that display. It adjusts the brightness of the display, adjusts the contrast, adjusts everything on that display to work correctly in a room. And you can take that key number and you can type it into any LG display, and you will now have every single room exactly the same. One of the biggest problems you walk into a room is the displays are all configured a little bit differently, and you have no idea where the problem is. HDMI cable is plugged into a different HDMI plug, right? You have to go deal with that. Make sure every single room is configured the same on the display side. Other display manufacturers have a way to copy configurations, where you can plug in a configuration. You can build one display, plug in a USB stick, copy it to another display, right? We know you're not going to all have the exact same display across your building. Hopefully you do. If you're lucky, you get that option, right, to put in the same display. Make them all the same, right? Even if you have to go back and retrofit those and redo them, make them the same. Now, the last part, whether it's connected or not, is a debate, right? Now, there's advantages to having your display connected to the internet, one of which is remote monitoring and management. So you can actually sit there, and if somebody, for some reason, pulls the power on it, you will get notified. You can also use the APIs within those tools to see what's on the remote display. So if you work with VOS Solutions or Utology or Symphony or any one of those, you should go to them and say, hey, we have an LG display. We want to be able to see what's on the display within your control panel, and have them work on that, because that is super important, right? That's one of the things people like about Cisco, is you can see what's on the display easily without needing a remote desktop app, without needing anything else. You can control the display remotely as well. If somebody, for whatever reason, figures out how to bypass everything and changes it, you can go back in and reconfigure it remotely. So let's talk about the ready room, the furniture in there. So one of the problems we run into with furniture nowadays is you put that table flat against the wall. You don't know what the angle is of that display, so you're going to get somebody who's got half a face on the display, right? Now, we've all been making displays wider. Logitech is 120, Jabra's got their 180, right? Which is great, it makes it simpler. However, if you're flat against the monitor, right, flat against the wall, regardless of what your camera is, you're going to be looking up at an angle the entire time. So that camera is going to be looking at your cheek while your head is strained and your eyes are strained, trying to see what's on that display, right? That's an ergonomic problem that you got to deal with, right? So by pushing that table further from the wall, people are going to be, they'll be forced to stay in picture, right? And they're not going to be straining as much. The other problem you run into here is blocking, right? The person behind you, right, can't be seen as cleanly. So what do? You push your seats out further, right? Well, how far can you push your seats out till you're not seen? So now we start making tables that help that. So everybody here has seen this table design, right? This arc table. Now, that same arc on the right-hand side kind of looks like the bridge of the Enterprise. You ever notice around the back of the captain's chair, there's this arc, right, where everybody stands when they're talking on screen. That is so that everybody looks exactly the same on camera, right? You're following that arc of the lens, so there is no distortion to anybody. Everybody's face is the same size. And again, if they know they look better, right, they're going to be much more confident on screen. On the right-hand side, we have a more modern table, right? We have the guitar pick, gumdrop, whatever you want to call it, right? This is a great solution for when you have both both in person and online. It forces people to sit in a direction that everybody can be seen and they can communicate with each other easily, right? These tables are becoming a lot more popular, right? Now, one of the biggest trends I find really fascinating is companies are opting for a higher quality room with less people in it. They would rather have 7 people in a room who can be well seen, right, with good image quality, rather than fit 14 people who struggle to be seen on screen. And they would rather build more of those rooms, right? That is a trend that's being worked on. Logitech, we're moving offices. Our offices are following this style, right? So that we have that ability. So let's talk about a little bit about camera height, right? Camera height, we all pretty much know that you want to be roughly between 35 to 45 inches off the floor, right? It all depends on table height, right? Really, what I tell people is find the tallest person in your company, find the shortest person in your company, literally take a tape measure, measure their eyes, average that out, that's where you want to put the camera. Put your display directly above that. The further back you are from that display and that camera, the more it's going to be looking like you're looking at that camera when you're actually looking at the screen, right? Now, in this example here, we're about 7 feet from the wall, right? Which is about a 72-inch screen. But maybe you're talking more analytical, right? That same room, you can put a 107-inch screen in that same room, and it's still going to work because you're looking at more detailed image. Now, this is a true story. Somebody sent me a picture, and they had a 107-inch display mounted to a wall. I was like, and it looked great. They had this great arc table, they had a rally bar. It was a beautiful looking room. He sends me a picture from the second day. There is a big hole in the wall, and that display is on the floor. They put up a display on a wall that wasn't designed to hold that weight, all right? So you got to make sure if you're putting these larger displays up, especially if they're a touch display, that your wall can handle it, right? A lot of people will put actuating-based Visa mounts on their wall so you can pull the display out. Next time you see one of those, pull it out. Watch the drywall go and bend and flex, all right? It happens. We almost lost a display in our office because of that, right? Somebody came into a room, they're like, I'm going to sit over here. They pulled the display out, turned it, and the whole wall started to go like this, right? When we came in the next day, like, nope. And we replaced out the Visa mount for that. So you got to understand what's holding up that display, right? Very important. All right, so work from anywhere, right? Work from from a shuttle. So let's talk about that one. So first we're going to talk a little about white balance. And white balance is really how your eye perceives natural light, right? And what it is that the camera is the substitution for the eye, and your light fixtures are substitution for the sun. The object is to find that balance where you look great, all right? Your eye can perceive about 10 million colors, right? And then we'll go on. So what you end up with is color temperature, right? Now, natural daylight, right, which is what we all want to be lit in, is around between 5,000 and 6,000 Kelvin, right? You can go to Home Depot and you can buy a light bulb that has any one of these. You can buy ones that are actually adjustable. To be honest, the adjustable ones don't work as well. They never get to the right temperature you want. Buy the right size light bulb, right? And really, all we're trying to do is just emulate that daylight inside, right? And for me, I always am adjusting. If you come by our booth, we have that Zello light. You can adjust color temperature, right? And you can adjust brightness. Well, if I am doing an important meeting with a customer, a partner, or a webinar, I am absolutely adjusting that color temperature to make sure it's right, because in my home office, I have a window on one side and I have a light bulb behind me, an LED that's actually about a 6,000K light bulb sitting behind me, right? And so I have that set up so I know when I'm doing something important, I'll go to my light and I'll adjust that color temperature till I see a point where I feel like I look my best, where I'm not blue, I'm not orange, where my color is right. And usually I don't wear glasses when I'm doing a webinar because of the reflection. So let's talk about some remote work. Some of you here may recognize Rishi from Logitech. He is our head of our alliances with Microsoft. I asked him to do a picture of his background because I really think it is a great example of a background, right? Now, one of the problems that you have with cameras that are auto white balanced is that if you have a white background behind you, a flat white background, that camera auto white balance isn't gonna do it correctly. It's not gonna pick up the white balance needed for your face. Even if you have a Brio or whatever camera that can do face detection, it's still gonna get white balance from the entire room, all right? So have something behind you that breaks up the light, and that really, I just like looking at the background because it's a conversation starter, right? You have the typewriter, right? You have all those things behind them. For me, in my home office, when COVID first hit, right, we're on lockdown, I had a green screen up. I had, virtual background. I've stopped all of that. I've got my Peloton on one side. I've got posters behind me. I have Logitech. I have a ton of crap behind me, right? And every so often I put a QR code behind me that says, if somebody takes a picture of it during a meeting, it says, why are you looking at this and not me? That's all it takes. It's just that page. So having that background is really important. So if you look at these two images on the left side, right, window on one side of him, right? So his face is dark. Look on the other side of him. He has now added a light up right in front of him, off to the side, to help light him up naturally, right? Same with the kid, right? Same problem, no light, light. Now there's a thing that most people don't know about called seasonal affective disorder, right? This is a real thing, yeah. Those who live in Washington, Alaska, know it very well, right? Even if you don't, even in California, right, where, well, now we get actually rain once in a while, this is a problem. Having that right light that makes you feel like you're outdoors really makes a difference to your health and well-being, right? So knowing that you have good lighting that's gonna make you feel good, make you look good, is gonna help. But how do you know if your lighting is correct for you? It's a very simple math problem, right? There are apps on your phone that can help measure lux, right? So you take the camera, you put it up to your face, and you put it up to your display. You get a base reading. You put it above your head, up to the ceiling, and then from the back wall to the display. If those last two are less than 1/2 of the face to camera, odds are you're gonna have some pretty good lighting there, right? If not, you're gonna wanna make some adjustments, right? Whether you add lights above you. Now, one of the problems, people love ring lights, right? These nice big round ring lights. You put them in front of your display, maybe you put your camera inside of it, right? Problem is, it's a ring. Your face is round, the ring is round, so you're gonna get really good lighting like this and then slowly fade off. It's gonna be flat. You're much better off having a light up higher that's just straight or off to the side or either side to help give you that contour to look great. I'm not saying anything bad about streamers and gamers. They're a huge part of Logitech. I love them. I love gamers and streamers, just to be clear. But again, it's a very common mistake that people do is they'll put up just one single light directly in front of them, right? If you just take that light and just move it off to the side just a little bit, it's gonna make a huge difference, right? Very little changes can make a lot happen. How do we get to that one? What was that one? So really, let's talk about what we looked at. The biggest thing here is really, you gotta look at the space, understand how it's gonna be used. Pay attention to everything in there. Look at the lighting, look at the walls, look at the size, the table, talk to the customer, understand what their intention is for that room, right? They may say, oh no, we're only using this for all hands. Great. We could put a much larger commercial display in there for less, right? And then go to another room like, oh no, this is more of like our engineering's use that. Okay, we're going to put a higher image quality in that room, right? It's going to cost you a little bit more, but they're going to have a better experience. So it doesn't have to be the same display in every single room, right? Same manufacturer certainly helps, right? Using a commercial TV, commercial display is certainly very important. Build it right the first time, right? If you ask Sean's session was a great thing about understanding what that room is, right? How to make it work, right? You gotta understand what's going on in there. And really watch out for the tribbles, right? Because they're just gonna be destructive, they're gonna multiply, and whether you call it a gremlin, a tribble, whatever, they'll show up. If you lock it down, right? If you make everything the same, it's always gonna work. So go forward, make it so. So if you have questions, but I have a question for you. Now, this is a kind of, maybe might be a two-part question. The winner of this question, I will send them a Logidoc, all right? So, what event will wake up a commercial display from sleep? Yeah?
CEC?
Nope.
It's like hot plug or something?
Hot plug, there you go. So find me afterwards, I'll get your address and I'll send you a doc, all right? Any other questions? Come on.
Where on the LG portal do you find commercial displays?
I'd like to introduce you to
LG.
Oh, wait, so where do you find where can you find LG commercial displays online?
LG.com/US/business.
LG.com/US/business, right? And like I said, Logitech and LG, we have a great alliance partnership, right? We've done a lot of work together, and Dan's just really fun to go hang out with. Yeah?
Are there any low voltage lighting vendors that you see used more often?
Brightline.
What's it?
Brightline is who we see used a lot. They also are one of the leaders in television lighting. So most TV studios, newsrooms, actually use Brightline. They have taken that same technology they used and made it available for conference rooms, right? So they have lighting that drop into a drop ceiling, use low voltage, right? One of the nice things about these lights is they have third-party tools that actually will say, oh, your meeting has started. Let me adjust the lighting for you for a conference room versus, oh, we're just meeting one-to-one, right? Those are very different lighting needs. Meeting together in a room, meeting online, different needs. They have partners that they work with that say, oh, your meeting has started. I'm going to turn on these lights, and I'm going to adjust the color temperature, and I'm going to do all these other things. Now, one of the things that we are trying to figure out how to do is how do we use a camera lens to help do that, right? Go like, where do we need light? Where do we do all the things? It's incredibly tricky to figure all that stuff out. But that is where we're trying to get to, is you walk into a conference room, you start a meeting, the lights change, the color temperature changes, everything looks good. Your whiteboard you have with a scribe on it is lit just right. So if you're going to use that, all those things come into play. Yeah?
I know you said camera height 35 to 45 inches in general,
Right.
Do you see that changing the larger the room is? Do you see it going higher the larger the room? Like if you're 40 feet back, 50 feet back?
Well, if you're that far back, you probably have multiple cameras at that point. Not really. And it's mainly because and the reason I say most is most conference rooms are really being redesigned for 14, 15 people, right? Maybe a 16, 18-foot desk, right? Is what you'd be looking at in old school terms, right? Where you have it against the wall. Now, one of the problems, there is another problem, as you push the table away from the wall, you may have to start thinking about ADA compliance, right? So maybe you have a credenza there to get you past that ADA compliance, right? So something to think about also as you put things further back is things, how far do they stick out from the wall? How much space do you have between the wall and the edge of the desk? And all those things come into play as well. Most companies really don't pay much attention to it until they have somebody who has a requirement. Then you go, uh-oh. And I've seen that happen a few times before. All right. Anything else? Good? All right. Thank you guys so much. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.